The city of Nova Esperanza slept under a dense fog that autumn morning. The cobblestone streets were still wet from the previous night's dew when baker Sebastio José de Silva made a discovery that would forever change the tranquility of the place. At exactly 5:47 a.m., while making his usual delivery route, he passed by Acacia Street and immediately noticed something wrong. The door of the small workshop called Tempo Perfido stood slightly ajar, with a faint yellow light escaping through the wooden cracks. This was strange because Ottokar Weiss, the 78-year-old German clockmaker who had lived in the city for over 5 decades, was famous for his rigidity and punctuality. His shop never opened before 8 a.m., and he always closed exactly at 6 p.m., like clockwork. Seuze approached cautiously, his baker's cart forgotten behind him, and pushed the door gently. It creaked open with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the morning silence. Inside, surrounded by the gentle ticking of hundreds of clocks, Ottokar Weiss sat motionless in his wooden chair, his head leaning peacefully over the workbench covered with tiny gears and springs. His eyes were closed, his hands resting on the polished wood as if he had simply fallen asleep while working. But it was what surrounded him that made Seuze's blood run cold. On every wall, on every shelf, on every surface of that small workshop, dozens of clocks, wall clocks, pendulum clocks, cuckoo clocks, pocket watches displayed in glass cases, all marked the exact same time, 3 hours and 47 minutes. The baker stood frozen for a long moment, listening to the silence where ticking should have been, and then he ran. He ran all the way to the police station, repeating to himself that the hands of time had stopped for old Ottokar, and somehow, impossibly, they had taken all those clocks with him into that frozen moment. Detective Amanda Torres arrived at the scene 40 minutes later, still buttoning her coat against the cold morning air. At 34, with 8 years of experience in the civil police, Amanda had learned that in a small city like Nova Esperanza, nothing exciting ever happened. She had transferred here seeking peace, a chance to heal from memories of a violent case in the capital that still haunted her dreams. But as she ducked under the yellow crime scene tape and pushed through the crowd of curious neighbors, she felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. This was not a natural death. She could feel it in the way the silence pressed against her ears, in the way the uniformed officer at the door avoided her eyes. Inside the workshop, the smell hit her first: aged wood, metal polish, machine oil, and something else underneath, sterile and almost medicinal. She stopped at the doorway and simply observed, as her old mentor had taught her. Let the scene speak first. Ottokar Weiss sat in his chair like a statue carved from memory, his gray vest immaculate, his silver hair carefully combed. His hands rested on the workbench, one still holding a small screwdriver with the precision of a surgeon. There were no visible wounds, no blood, no signs of struggle. For a moment, Amanda allowed herself to believe this was simply what it looked like, an old man, alone, his heart finally giving out. But then her eyes traveled upward to the walls, and she understood why the rookie officer looked so pale. The clocks covered every surface like a mechanical forest frozen in time. Grandfather clocks stood like silent sentinels. Cuckoo clocks hung in neat rows. Pocket watches lay in glass cases like sleeping insects. And every single one displayed the same time, 3:47. Amanda moved slowly through the workshop, her latex-gloved fingers hovering over surfaces without touching. The clocks were not simply stopped, they had been deliberately set to that time. The winding mechanisms on the pendulum clocks were still tight, meaning they hadn't run down naturally. Someone had manually moved each pair of hands to that specific position, and whoever did it had been methodical, almost obsessive about precision. She counted quickly, at least 40 clocks in the main room alone. This would have taken hours to do properly, especially for an old man with arthritic hands. But was Ottokar the one who did it? And if so, why? And if not, who else had been in this workshop during the night, moving the hands of time while the clockmaker sat dead at his bench? Amanda knelt beside the body and examined it more closely. Ottokar's skin was cool but not cold, suggesting he had died perhaps 6 to 8 hours earlier, placing the time of death between 9 p.m. and midnight. His pupils were fixed and dilated, his lips slightly blue, but there were no signs of trauma. It looked, for all the world, like a simple heart attack. But the clock screamed otherwise. Then she noticed the pocket watch. It lay on the workbench directly in front of Ottokar's still hands, separated from other items as if placed with particular care. Unlike the other timepieces, this one was not stopped at 3:47. Its hands had been removed entirely, and the back cover was open, revealing the intricate interior mechanism. But instead of gears and springs, the watch housed a small piece of paper, yellowed and fragile with age, carefully folded to fit inside the circular cavity. Amanda felt her pulse quicken as she used tweezers to gently extract the paper. She unfolded it on the workbench, revealing coordinates written in faded brown ink: 23 degrees 47 minutes south, 45 degrees 52 minutes west. She recognized the format immediately: degrees and minutes south, degrees and minutes west. These were GPS coordinates, though they predated GPS by decades. Someone had marked a specific location on the map, and that someone had hidden those coordinates inside a pocket watch that Ottokar Weiss had kept until the moment he died. Amanda looked up at Officer Marcello. "I need you to do 3 things. First, get the medical examiner here personally. Second, start knocking on doors. Talk to every neighbor within 2 blocks. Third, I want everything we have on Ottokar Weiss. Birth certificate, immigration records, tax returns, everything. If he bought a loaf of bread in 1985, I want to know about it." Marcello nodded and hurried away, grateful to have something concrete to do. Amanda turned back to the pocket watch, studying it under her flashlight. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the Swiss, probably from the 1940s, with engravings so fine they could only be appreciated under magnification. On the inside of the cover, almost invisible to the naked eye, 2 initials were engraved: HB. She pulled out her phone and entered the coordinates into a mapping application. The result appeared within seconds: an abandoned farm property about 30 kilometers outside the city, in a rural area locals called the Old Brandt Place. The Brandt family. The name triggered something in Amanda's memory, some half-forgotten story from the newspaper archives. The medical examiner, Dr. Alsa Martins, arrived 2 hours later, grumbling about being called away from his breakfast but falling silent the moment he entered the workshop. After 20 minutes of careful examination, he looked up at Amanda with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Heart attack," he said simply. "I'd bet my license on it." The man's arteries were probably like old pipes, ready to burst at any moment. But... He paused, frowning. "Look at his hands. Look at his clothes. There's not a scratch on him, not a single sign of distress. When most people have heart attacks, they clutch their chest, they fall, they grab at things. But this man died sitting perfectly upright, with a screwdriver still in his hand, as if he simply stopped breathing between one heartbeat and the next. It's possible that something triggered it. Shock, fear, sudden emotional stress. The heart doesn't care if the bullet is made of lead or memory. Either way, it stops." Amanda absorbed this information silently. If Ottokar had died of natural causes, technically there was no crime to investigate. But the clocks, the coordinates, the hidden message inside the watch, none of these were natural. Someone had arranged this scene and wanted it to be found exactly this way. The question was whether that someone was Ottokar himself, preparing his own death scene like a final message, or whether it was someone else who had been in this workshop during the clockmaker's final moments. She looked again at the coordinates and the initials HB. The Brandt family. She spent the afternoon at the city library, digging through old newspapers, and what she found made her blood run cold. The Brandt family had been one of the wealthiest in the entire region back in the 1960s. German immigrants who made their fortune in coffee and cattle, they built a magnificent estate that was the envy of everyone in Nova Esperança. The patriarch, Heinrich Brandt, was known as a hard man, a perfectionist who demanded the same precision from his workers that he expected from his beloved collection of antique watches. According to old newspaper articles, Heinrich Brandt owned over 100 rare timepieces, some dating back to the 18th century, worth more money than most people in Brazil would see in a lifetime. But in 1963, disaster struck. On the night of March 15th, while the Brandt family attended a charity gala in São Paulo, thieves broke into the mansion and cracked the supposedly impregnable safe that housed the watch collection. They took everything, every single watch, every pocket chronometer, every precious timepiece. The police investigation went nowhere. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no leads. The only thing investigators could determine was that the safe had been opened by an expert. Someone had either known the combination or possessed the skills to pick a lock that was supposedly unpickable. Heinrich Brandt was devastated. He offered rewards, hired private detectives, but nothing ever came of it. The watches simply vanished. 3 years later, Heinrich died of a heart attack, exactly like Ottokar Weiss, Amanda noted with a chill, and his widow sold the property and moved away, leaving the mansion to rot. The case became one of those local legends whispered about in bars, a mystery that would never be solved. But now, 60 years later, a dead clockmaker had left coordinates pointing directly to that abandoned property, hidden inside a pocket watch engraved with the initials HB. Amanda drove out to the old Brandt property the next morning, accompanied by Officer Marcelo, who had finally recovered some of his color. The road was rough, little more than 2 tracks through overgrown vegetation. After 40 minutes of slow progress, they emerged into a clearing and saw it, the skeleton of what had once been a magnificent mansion, 3 stories of colonial architecture, now reduced to crumbling walls and a collapsed roof. Vines crawled up the facades like green fingers claiming back what belonged to nature. The silence was absolute. Amanda stepped out of the jeep and approached cautiously, her hand resting on her service weapon. The front door hung askew on broken hinges, and she pushed through into what had once been an imposing entrance hall. Dust covered everything, layered thickly on the remains of furniture left to rot, on fallen chandeliers, on photographs still hanging crookedly on walls. She moved through room after room until she found the stairs leading down to the basement. They were stone, solid despite the decay above, and they descended into darkness. Amanda clicked on her flashlight and led the way, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. At the bottom, a heavy wooden door stood closed, and unlike everything else in this ruined house, this door looked recently used. The lock was scratched, the wood around the handle worn smooth by recent touch. She pushed it open and shone her light inside. The basement room was small, maybe 5 meters square, with stone walls and a concrete floor. In the center stood a single wooden table, and on that table, arranged with geometric precision, lay 12 antique watches. The watches were displayed in a perfect circle, their glass faces reflecting Amanda's flashlight beam like 12 tiny moons. She approached slowly, her heart pounding, and saw that each watch was stopped at exactly 3:47, the same time as the clocks in Ottokar's workshop. But these watches were different. These were the missing Brandt collection, she was certain of it. The craftsmanship was unmistakable, Swiss enamel work, German precision engineering, English complications that were masterpieces of mechanical art. And on each one, engraved somewhere discreet, were the initials HB. Next to the circle of watches lay a single sheet of paper, protected in a plastic sleeve, with words written in elegant cursive, "The blind see what others don't. The rest is just time." Marcello let out a low whistle behind her. "Detective, what does this mean? Who put these here?" Amanda didn't answer immediately. The watches had been hidden here for 60 years, and someone had recently arranged them on this table. Someone who knew about the Brandt robbery, someone who had access to Ottokar's workshop, someone who wanted the connection between the dead clockmaker and the stolen collection to be discovered. But if Ottokar was the thief, why hide the watches for 6 decades only to reveal them after his death? And if he wasn't the thief, who was? She remembered the initials on the pocket watch, HB Heinrich Brandt. But Heinrich had been dead for 57 years. She looked again at the note. "The blind see what others don't." Blind. Why blind? Ottokar Weiss had perfect vision until his death. But someone else in this story might have been blind to the truth all these years. Back at the station, Amanda spread photographs of the 12 watches across her desk and called in an expert, Dr. Rafael Mendez, a professor of antique horology from the University of São Paulo. He arrived the next morning with the barely contained excitement of a child on Christmas morning, his fingers trembling slightly as he examined the images under magnification. "These are authentic," he breathed after several minutes of intense study. "Absolutely, unquestionably authentic. Look at the engraving on this brigade, that's original work from the 1820s. And this Patek Philippe, the enamel work alone is museum quality. If these are the Brandt watches, and I'm certain they are, then their value today would be somewhere in the range of 8 to 12 million reais." Amanda absorbed this calmly. "So we're looking at a motive for murder." Dr. Mendez looked up sharply. "Murder?" "The newspaper said the clockmaker died of natural causes." "The newspaper prints what we tell them," Amanda replied. "But you're a historian. Tell me about Heinrich Brandt. What kind of man was he?" The professor removed his glasses and cleaned them thoughtfully. "Heinrich Brandt was a difficult man. Brilliant, certainly, with an eye for quality unmatched in South America. But he had a temper, made enemies easily, and there were rumors about his treatment of employees. Particularly young female employees. Nothing proven, but enough that people talked. He brought several young women from Germany to work as governesses, and they never stayed long. Always left suddenly, always with no explanation." Amanda felt the pieces clicking into place like the gears of a well-made watch. "Do you have any names?" she asked. Dr. Mendez shook his head. "Not specifically. But if you want my honest opinion, the Brandt robbery was never about the money. It was personal. Someone wanted to hurt Heinrich Brandt in the worst possible way, and taking his watches was how they did it. The break in the case came from an unexpected source the following day. Officer Marcello, still eager to prove himself, had spent hours going through old city records, immigration documents, and newspaper archives. What he found was a single photograph, published in the local newspaper in 1962, showing a group of German immigrants arriving in Nova Esperança. In the background stood a young man with light hair and intense eyes, Ottokar Weiss, at age 22, just arrived in Brazil. And next to him stood a young woman with the same light hair, the same bone structure, her face turned slightly away from the camera as if she didn't want to be photographed. The caption identified her only as Greta W., also from Germany, seeking work in the region. Amanda held the photograph carefully, her mind racing. Greta W. She remembered a photograph found in Ottokar's apartment, a young woman with Greta, 1962. Forgive me written on the back. This was his sister, or perhaps something more, and she had come to Brazil with him. But she had never appeared in any other records. No marriage certificate, no death certificate, no work permits. It was as if she had vanished into thin air shortly after arriving. Amanda pulled up everything she could find about Heinrich Brandt's household staff in 1962 and 1963. There it was, buried in an old employment ledger from the Brandt estate that had been donated to the City Historical Society. Greta Weiss, hired as governess in September 1962, dismissed without cause in February 1963. Dismissed just 1 month before the robbery. Dismissed right around the time that rumors about Heinrich Brandt's treatment of young female employees had begun to circulate. Amanda sat back in her chair, the full weight of the story settling over her like a cold mist. Ottokar Weiss had come to Brazil with his sister, seeking a better life. His sister had gone to work for Heinrich Brandt, and something had happened there, something terrible enough that she had been dismissed in shame, something terrible enough that she had disappeared from history entirely. And then, 1 month later, Heinrich Brandt's precious watches had been stolen by someone who knew how to open an unpickable safe. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in the form of an unexpected visitor at the station late that evening. Officer Marcello knocked on her door, his expression unreadable. "Detective, there's someone here to see you." An elderly woman. "She says she has information about the Brandt case." The woman who entered was elegant despite her advanced age, probably in her late 70s, with white hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that held the sharp intelligence of someone who had seen too much and forgotten nothing. She walked with a cane but refused assistance, lowering herself into the chair across from Amanda's desk with quiet dignity. "My name is Elisa Brandt," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I am Heinrich Brandt's daughter." Amanda felt the air leave the room. Heinrich Brandt's daughter, the only surviving member of the family, according to records. She had been just a teenager at the time of the robbery, and she had vanished from public view shortly after her father's death, moving to Europe and rarely returning. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Brandt," Amanda said carefully. "May I offer you coffee?" Elisa waved away the offer. "I didn't come here for coffee. I came because I read about Ottokar Weiss's death, and I knew that if anyone was going to understand what really happened 60 years ago, it would be whoever investigated that death." She paused, gathering herself. "The robbery was never reported correctly. My father was not just a collector of watches. He was a collector of beautiful things, and sometimes the things he collected included people. Greta Weiss was my governess. She was kind to me when no one else was. She taught me to read German poetry, to appreciate music, to see beauty in small things. And my father didn't see her as a person. He saw her as another possession. When she resisted, he destroyed her." Elisa's voice remained steady, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He spread lies about her. Told everyone she had tried to seduce him, that she was immoral, that she had stolen from the household. There was no proof, but in a small town, proof doesn't matter. Reputation matters. He destroyed hers completely. She was deported back to Germany in disgrace. I was 15 years old, and I watched it happen, and I was too afraid to speak up." Amanda listened in silence, her heart aching for the girl Elisa had been and the woman she had become, carrying this guilt for 60 years. "And Ottokar?" she asked gently. "He was Greta's brother. He came to Brazil to find her, to build a new life together. But by the time he arrived, she was already gone, and my father was still here, untouched, surrounded by his precious watches. Elisa paused, taking a shaky breath. Ottokar came to the mansion on the night of March 15, 1963. He didn't come to steal anything. He came to confront my father, to demand justice for his sister. I was hiding in the hallway outside my father's study. I used to hide there sometimes, listening. I heard everything. Ottokar confronted him, accused him of destroying Greta's life. My father laughed at him, told him that no one would ever believe a poor immigrant over a wealthy landowner. And then, her voice cracked. And then my father clutched his chest and fell. Heart attack. Just like the medical examiner said. Just like Ottokar, 60 years later. Ottokar could have run, Elisa continued, her voice strengthening. He could have let my father die and walked away, and no one would ever have known he was there. But he wasn't a killer. He was a clockmaker, a man who spent his life fixing things, not breaking them. He called for help, stayed with my father until the ambulance arrived, and then disappeared into the night, hoping to put it all behind him. Amanda leaned forward. But the watches disappeared that night. If Ottokar didn't take them. Elisa reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather pouch, placing it gently on the desk. From inside, she withdrew an antique pocket watch, identical to the ones found in the farmhouse, with the same elegant engravings and the same initials, HB. I took them, she said quietly, the words falling into the silence like stones into deep water. I was 17 years old, and I had spent my entire life terrified of my father. When he fell, I saw my chance. I knew the combination to the safe. I had watched him open it 100 times. I emptied it while Ottokar was on the phone with the ambulance, and I hid the watches in a place no one would ever think to look, the old well on our property, the one that had been dry for decades. I kept this one as proof, in case I ever needed it. The rest stayed there for 60 years. Amanda sat in stunned silence. Elisa Brandt had carried this secret for 6 decades, had watched an innocent man live under a shadow of suspicion, had watched her own family collapse under the weight of loss and shame, and had never once spoken the truth. Why are you telling me this now? Amanda finally asked. Elisa's eyes met hers with painful clarity. Because Ottokar is dead, and he died still carrying the burden of my silence. I read about his passing and saw the photograph of his workshop. All those clocks stopped at 3:47. Do you know what that number means? It was the time on the clock in my father's study when he fell. Ottokar didn't stop those clocks for himself. He stopped them to mark the moment everything changed. He spent 60 years in this city, fixing other people's time, while his own life stood frozen at 3:47 on a night he could never escape. And I let him. I let him carry that weight alone because I was too afraid to tell the truth. The tears were falling freely now, but Elisa made no move to wipe them away. The note in the farmhouse, the blind see what others don't, that was for me. I was the blind one. Blind to my own cowardice, blind to the suffering I allowed to continue, blind to the fact that silence is its own kind of violence. Ottokar knew, somehow. He knew I had taken the watches, and he spent his entire life waiting for me to have the courage to admit it. And I never did. Not until he was gone. The investigation officially closed 3 days later. The watches were recovered from the farmhouse, all 12 of them, preserved in the dry well for 60 years without a single scratch. Dr. Mendez authenticated them, and they were donated to a museum in Sao Paulo with a plaque that told the true story, not of a mysterious robbery, but of a young girl's desperate act of rebellion against a tyrant father, and of a clockmaker who spent his life in silent penance for a crime he didn't commit. Elisa Brandt faced no charges, the statute of limitations had long expired. But she faced something far more difficult, the judgment of her own conscience, and the knowledge that she had let an innocent man suffer for her silence. She visited Ottokar's grave on the day of the museum donation, placing a single white rose on the simple headstone that read only Ottokar Weiss, 1927–2005, clockmaker. Amanda found her there at sunset, standing alone in the cemetery, the wind stirring her white hair. They stood together in silence for a long moment, two women bound by a story that had taken 60 years to tell. Finally, Elisa spoke without turning. "Do you think he forgave me?" Amanda considered the question carefully. She thought about the clock stopped at 3:47, about the coordinates hidden in the pocket watch, about the note that spoke of blindness and sight. She thought about a man who had spent his entire adult life in a small city, fixing other people's time, waiting for someone to finally see the truth. "I think," she said slowly, "that he wasn't waiting for forgiveness. I think he was waiting for you to forgive yourself." Elisa turned then, and for the first time, Amanda saw something like peace in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she walked away, leaving Amanda alone with the silence and the setting sun. That night, Amanda sat in her small apartment with the pocket watch that Elisa had given her, the one from Ottokar's workbench, the one with the coordinates hidden inside. She held it in her hands, feeling its weight, running her fingers over the smooth case and the initials HB that had started this whole journey. On a whim, she wound it carefully, listening to the familiar tick-tick-tick as the mechanism came to life. For the first time in 60 years, the hands began to move. She watched them progress past 3:47, past 3:48, past 3:49, marking time that had been frozen for decades. It felt like watching a resurrection, like witnessing the moment when a ghost finally becomes flesh again. She thought about Ottokar Weiss, the blind clockmaker who saw everything. She thought about Elisa Brandt, the girl who became a woman carrying a weight too heavy for any single person to bear. She thought about Greta, whose name appeared on a photograph and nowhere else, whose story had been erased by a cruel man's lies. And she thought about time, how it moves whether we want it to or not, how it heals some wounds while keeping others fresh, how it can stand still in a room full of stopped clocks while the world outside keeps turning. The pocket watch ticked on in her hand, a small sound in the silence of her apartment, marking seconds that would never come again. Amanda set it on her nightstand and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would file her final report, close the case that had consumed her for 2 weeks, and return to the quiet life she had sought when she moved to Nova Esperança. But tonight, she let herself think about all the frozen moments and all the lives she had touched. The watch ticked on, patient and inexorable, marking the passage of moments into memory, of memory into history, of history into silence. And somewhere in the darkness, Amanda Torres finally understood what Ottokar Weiss had known all along, that the blind are not those who cannot see, but those who refuse to look. The case of the blind clockmaker was closed, but his story lived on in the ticking of that watch, in the memory of those who finally learned to look, in the quiet understanding that time, like truth, always finds a way to move forward.